Well, hey everybody, Pastor Steve here, and as always, I'm really thankful for you being with me. And I want to say a word to those who are not part of First Baptist Church or in the Rock Hill, York County vicinity. You live in other places, but you regularly, faithfully watch these devotions or listen to the podcast of them. I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate you doing that. I'm glad you are part of our online family, and I want to encourage you to message us and let us know what these devotions mean to you or what God is doing in your life. That's always an encouragement to me. And I'd love for you to tell someone else about these devotions, whether it's the video that you watch on YouTube or the podcast you listen to. Help get the word out. But again, thank you for being part of our online family. Today, we are in Proverbs chapter 22, and there are several verses in this chapter that talk about the rich, the poor, money, power, etc. And since there were several verses related to those topics, I thought I'd focus on that for a few moments. It begins with that in verse 1 when he says, "A good name is to be more desired than great wealth. Favor is better than silver and gold." I love that verse. But your reputation and the way people view you is more important than how much material possessions you have. Character and reputation matter, he's saying. Also in verse 2, the rich and the poor have a common bond. The Lord is the maker of them all. Wow. Every person on this planet, no matter how rich or how poor, they have one thing in common. Each of them, each and every one of them is created in the image of God. Our memory verse at First Baptist for January was Genesis 1:27 that talks about God creating us in his image. And that is where our value and worth comes from, meaning that the poorest of the poor has value because they are created in the image of God, just as the wealthiest of the wealthy has value, not because of their wealth, but because they are created in the image of God. It would be well for all of us to remember this truth. Look at verse 7. Verse 7, the Bible says, "The rich rules over the poor, and the person who borrows becomes the lender's slave." Now, there's really two things in there. The rich rules over the poor. We know that generally, as a rule, there are exceptions, but as a rule, people who are wealthy tend to have more power, more influence. They tend to be more commonly in places of decision-making and authority and so on. So that's true. But it's equally true, he says, because poor people tend to borrow from rich people. Now we think about borrowing from banks and lending institutions, but when you borrow, you become dependent on the person from whom you borrowed the money. And the truth is, if you're not careful, you need to pay attention, because debt can make you a slave. People can be house poor. They can they cannot be able to live the way they want to because they're so far in debt. People who rob from God and don't give because they have so much debt. Debt makes you a slave. So be very, very careful. Also, verse 9, he says, "He who is generous will be blessed, for he gives some of his food to the poor." In other words, God notices and honors generosity. God notices and honors generosity. Very important truth. Verse 16, "He who oppresses the poor to make more for himself, or who gives to the rich will only come to poverty." The first part of that verse especially, the one who oppresses, takes advantage of the poor to make more for himself. In other words, you take advantage of someone who is powerless, weak, vulnerable, poor, in debt, so that you can become richer. Just because something's legal does not mean it's right. And just because it's business and it's legal does not mean it has the favor of God. So be warned. God will be the judge. Verses 22 and 23. Do not rob the poor because he is poor, or crush the afflicted at the gate. The gate would be for us the courts, the judicial system. For the Lord will plead their case and take the life of those who rob them. Wow. God doesn't like it when someone takes advantage of a poor or vulnerable person, whether it's taking advantage of them financially or legally. Verses 26 and 27. Do not be among those who give pledges, among those who become guarantors for debts. If you have nothing with which to pay, why should he take your bed from under you? The idea is that co-signing a loan puts you at risk, because if the other person doesn't pay, you will pay. And then also backing up to what I read previously, verses 22 and 23, kind of goes along with verse 16, where he says, he who oppresses the poor to make more for himself or gives to the rich. Well, 22 and 23, the idea is God God doesn't like it when you're in debt, and that debt makes you a slave. God doesn't like it when you're rich and you take advantage of people who are poor or vulnerable. God doesn't like it when you abuse people. So there are things that may be in business legal. That doesn't mean it's righteous. And as followers of Christ, we don't do things just because it's legal. We do things because it's righteous. So it's just some important verses that I think we need to hear in our culture. A couple of others that I really like in this chapter, real quickly, as I wrap this up. Verse 10, he says, drive out the scoffer, and contention will go out. Even strife and dishonor will cease. And similar to that is verse 24, when he says, do not associate with a man given to anger, or go with a hot-tempered man. The idea is that if you hang out with people who like to argue, like to create strife, who have bad tempers, who have anger problems, who like to mock and make fun of others, sooner or later you're going to get caught up in their mess. And if you're not careful, their behaviors and their attitudes will start rubbing off on you, and you start becoming more like them. So God says, you don't need people like that in your life. And when you eliminate them from your life, when you refuse to empower people like that in your life or in your church, there's more peace. There's just more peace. Because contentious, angry, argumentative, mocking people always keep things stirred up. And God says you're better off to cut it out of your life. Well, that's the word for today. Hey, bring somebody with you to worship Sunday, and then I'll see you Monday as we get back in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 3. God bless you. Have a wonderful weekend.